Amazing. So it was great to hear a global overview there from Tim and Liz. Now we're going to be focusing a little bit on a more specific region at hand, and we're going to turn our attention now to the United Arab Emirates. They're moving ahead extremely fast when it comes to digital assets acquisition, but also implementation. So I'm going to turn the stage over now to Josef Holm, who'll be moderating this discussion. Big round of applause for these speakers. We also have Nabyl Maskari of Maskari Holdings. Hello and welcome. James Munce, CEO of Abu Dhabi Catalyst Partners. And also Faisal Al-Madabi.
All right. Good morning again, everybody. I'm super excited to be here on this panel with a group of very special and interesting guests who have joined us from the UAE today. I moved to the UAE last year with my family, and we have a lot of really interesting things going on there. For example, we're going to set up another venture studio. We're going to set up a new fund. We're working on producing a large LA blockchain summit-style conference there, and a few other things on the more on the side of training more blockchain devs. And I've really fallen in love with the country and the people, and I love the mindset, and especially how forward-thinking they are. That's why we think this is the right place for us to be right now, to expand Draper, Goren, Holm. And I'm super excited to give you guys now an opportunity to introduce yourself. Thanks again for flying halfway around the world to be here, and let's kick it off over there with Nabyl.
Is there something specifically you want me to
No,
address?
just introduce yourself, what you do,
sure.
and then we will start with the questions.
Perfect. So my name is Nabyl Maskari. I am a Emirati family office based in Abu Dhabi. My core business has typically been oil and gas, but like many things in the UAE, and we'll talk a little bit about that, there's been sort of this diversification of the last 50 years. And as part of that journey, our family has also diversified. So today we're involved in many different sectors, but primarily facing towards the government and supporting the public aspirations that they have. So we're active, as I said, from oil and gas, clean energy, ICT, defense. So it's a sort of conglomerate approach, but faced really towards the public sector. Thanks.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. I'm part of a company called ADQ. Please bear with me, my voice is a bit hoarse. I blame the guys from DGH for last night's late dinner. So my role at ADQ is launching new ventures for the portfolio. We look at next generation business models that will help the portfolio to transform and evolve. And we are working with a lot of companies within the portfolio of DGH to see how can we use their expertise to help our portfolio to transform.
Great. James Munce, CEO of Abu Dhabi Catalyst Partners. Thanks for having us, Joseph. And it's a pleasure to come halfway around the world and be in New York in the sunshine. The fund that we run is backed by Mubadala, one of the sovereign wealth funds in Abu Dhabi. And we invest in fund managers, corporates who are setting up in Abu Dhabi and be a partner to those businesses to help them grow in a sustainable, hopefully aggressive way. We've deployed about $1 billion to date into a couple of really interesting companies, including some digital assets businesses.
Cool. So before we dive into the weeds, something more high level. The UAE is a very young country. Last year they celebrated their 50th anniversary. I was born and raised in Austria. Vienna is like 1,000 years old. So it's very fascinating to go there and see just the pace of development and how bold and forward-thinking the leadership is. And so, Nabyl, what's from your perspective? What's the plan in regards to blockchain and digital assets, and how will they shape the future of the UAE?
So I think it's useful if you want to talk about the path forward. It's sometimes important to reflect on the path that has just sort of been undertaken. And 50 years for a span, I mean, it's quite small for a developed country or a Western economy. For us, I think what we've done in those 5 decades is quite remarkable. Just a quick show of hands, I'll make this a bit interactive. How many of you have actually visited the UAE at least once or traveled through? All right, okay, so perfect, right? So you can imagine when I was young, and don't use the voice because I was educated in the US, but when I traveled, no one knew where the UAE was. No one had heard of Abu Dhabi. No one had heard of Dubai. And I remember for being a young boy, this sort of amazing moment in like 1984, the very first time I ever saw my country in print was when Garfield sent Nirmal to like Abu Dhabi. And Jim Davis, the writer at that time, this famous comic that was done, literally was trying to find a place more inaccessible than Timbuktu. And so he put Abu Dhabi on the map. Imagine sort of for families like ours who have been part of that story and history, and we've been a business supporting the government since before it was a country, those 50 years have just been this amazing path of leadership. And I have to take a moment to just reflect. We are today mourning the passing of our president, His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed. We wouldn't be able to achieve what has been done if we didn't have that level of consistent sort of strategic insight that Abu Dhabi and the UAE could be much more than just an oil-producing state, right? Even though oil and gas defines much of our economy and it's our relationship to both the East and to the West, the reality is that the allocation of those proceeds has been strategic, it's been concerted, and it's been a critical way to enable the rest of the world to discover the UAE. So when we talk about diversifying our economy, it's mostly into things that are core infrastructure related. The reason why so many of you are able to raise your hands is that we were investing in infrastructure in our airlines, whether it's Emirates or Etihad. We've been investing heavily in the logistics and using Abu Dhabi as an access point to the broader region. Most people know about us for our connectivity. We made the headline just a few days ago when our local state-controlled telco, called Etisalat previously, now called EAN, invested $4.4 billion to become the largest single shareholder in Vodafone. So it doesn't matter how you think about what the boundaries of the UAE are itself, it's how it connects to the rest of the world. And that's really fundamentally what blockchain is to us. It's connectivity at its core, right? The reality for us is if we as a family look at integrating blockchain more broadly, it will always be based around core sectors that use sort of the applicability of that technology or the use case to create a better and a more efficient model, right? So if we're talking about smart contracts and supply chain, if we're talking about DeFi applications for the unbanked in a very broad region, if we're talking about looking at provenance from seed to source on our food security, I think blockchain is a core enabler, and that's how the government is investing, and we as a private family, because it's essentially that infrastructure layer, that foundation that blockchain is going to let us do in many different aspects of the economy. So it's a very exciting time. You have a kind of a cross-section of both private and public actors, and I think that's also what's unique about the UAE and Abu Dhabi. The government leads, but families, private sector follow, and in many times we're encouraged to take that journey. And these are colleagues of mine today, but we represent, I think, that ecosystem that was referred to earlier as well.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right, you know, and I think it's really inspiring and fascinating to watch the pace of innovation and how, you know, in the States, they're still trying to figure out what to do about blockchain and Bitcoin and digital assets in general. And in the UAE, it's just been decided that it's good for the country. And now they're implementing it, which gives them a really nice starting point. Faisal, you're the director of incubation at ADQ. ADQ is maybe not very well known here in the room. So can you talk a little bit about what you guys do and also what your longer term vision is, what kind of blockchain companies you like to see incubated and what your focus is?
Yes, sure, happy to. So as you pointed out, that the name ADQ might not be as familiar as some of the other companies you've heard of in the region. That's primarily because the company is new. It was formed about 3 years ago as the holding company for state-owned assets that covers a wide range of sectors from aviation to energy to food to healthcare. And the idea is to make these assets more efficient and future-proof. And as part of my role, in terms of incubation, we look at what business models can we adopt today to future-proof the portfolio. We look at how to create the digital infrastructure that's going to allow us to build applications for the future. So Some examples include launching a neobank or having specific use cases in areas such as carbon credit trading, or as Nabyl has mentioned, a few applications when it comes to transport and food traceability. So for us, the focus today is to build the foundation upon which we can build these future applications for the portfolio. And we're very excited to hear this morning about some of the companies in the GS portfolio to see how can we onboard the talent and the expertise to help us fast track our progress.
Very nice. Awesome. James, you are like me, an immigrant to the UAE, and you've lived in a bunch of different places in your life and during your career. What was it for you that has actually attracted you to Abu Dhabi, and maybe you can give some color to what it's like living there and being with a family and having a career for anyone in the room who may want to check it out.
Yeah, it's I don't think I want to claim to be an oracle of a pre-pandemic world, but 4 years ago, living in London and spending a lot of time in New York, and a feeling both personally and professionally that there was a better way of living. From a personal standpoint, 3 young children, commuting, long hours, and a real craving for being closer to the water, having more sun. My suntan's doing pretty well. Just having a better lifestyle. And we fast forward to where we are now, and that's played out brilliantly. The UAE have handled the pandemic better than most countries. It's the safest city in the world. My family absolutely love being there. We've made some wonderful friends since we've been there. My commute to work is 10 minutes in the car. I'm 100 meters from the beach and live about 50 meters from Faisal. We don't really see each other at home, but we live close together. And it's just a wonderful, safe community to live in, and a very low tax jurisdiction. It has some other good perks as well. From a work perspective, very naively, I think, looking back and arrogantly almost, believing that London and New York were the centers of finance. And if you're going to be in finance or funds management, you had to be in those jurisdictions. When I started visiting the UAE and Abu Dhabi and seeing what was going on there and what the leadership were investing in and their forward thinking in terms of asset classes and their embracing of digital assets as one example, I was wrong, and it can be a wonderful place and an interesting place to build businesses and build ecosystems in. And again, post-pandemic, that's panned out exactly as we thought would happen. People are realizing that they can work remotely. If you're trading European public markets, you can have a wonderful life where you're not going to the office at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you can go in at 8 o'clock, you can swim in the sea in Dubai, you can go out for wonderful food, you can enjoy all the trappings of a lovely lifestyle, and still be pretty accessible to the rest of the world. And so for us, it's been a wonderful experience, and we'd love to welcome more people there.
I can second every little thing you said there. It's true. It's just a really great place to live in, and also with family. My beautiful wife Talara over there, and our kids. Like I said, we've been living there since October. So other than maybe funds like DGH moving there, Nabyl, what else are like the what's the advantage of being there right now as a company, as a startup, or a founding team, in particular in Abu Dhabi, in terms of the investments that are being made and investors seeking investments and the whole ecosystem that is now starting up?
So I actually think it's reflected on the panel, right? You're hearing 2 different sets of actors, all in a kind of coordinated function, but they're really responsible for different aspects of creating this ecosystem for those that choose to locate within both Abu Dhabi or Dubai, more broadly to the UAE, and how can that be a way for you to access a much broader region, right? So today, if you were to look at the Abu Dhabi, in this case, let's talk about digital assets as the purpose of this conference, there's so much happening there just because we have the ability as a nimble country with very clear leadership to really advance regulation, right? There's a reason why Binance, FTX, most of those large, in this case, they're world leaders. They're choosing to relocate, and in some cases, headquarters to places like the UAE. And I think that that's because there's an idea that the governance layer that's in place is there to encourage growth and business. It's not there to stifle it. and I've heard a lot of comments about US regulation. Certainly there needs to be controls, and in Abu Dhabi, as an example, there's a lot of governance built in. They have very strong credibility because they're an institutional investor by and large, right? So facets of that sort of relationship can be different depending on where you're locating there. I do think that you need to recognize we are also a energy state, and so while we're talking a lot about blockchain and everything around tokens, I also think you're probably going to hear and see that there will be significant mining investments that will happen because we're a low-cost energy producer. And we can do that through renewables. Most people know us for our oil and gas. The reality is we're in the solar belt. We have a very good access to low-cost PV, and we're the only one in the region who has access to nuclear power, right? We have 2 reactors online. That means that we can do something that the rest of the world has been struggling with, which is true netting off of a sort of green Bitcoin or a green coin or token that comes out. So there's a lot of different players that can engage in our ecosystem, from the infrastructure side of the mining all the way through to the funds that are investing in the DeFi space, and of course, even the big exchanges that want to take advantage of the fact that we are a cross-border environment, just by the nature of being truly in the Middle East and sort of straddling different time zones. So I think that it's a very wide net that we're casting, but with a through line that says, if you're willing to come and locate within the UAE, there should be reciprocity in saying that you have a long-term relationship to the country. So in my time, when you used to be able to come to the UAE, you had to do it attached to a labor visa, right? You were somebody that worked in the environment. There wasn't a long-term relationship you had. The leadership has said, no, we want you to feel like this is your home. And Josef is a good example of that. He's relocated there, James is relocated there, but in many cases, their relationship through things like golden visas mean that they have a relationship to the UAE that has nothing to do with their company. It has to do with the fact that they're an important thought leader, and they're going to be somebody we want long-term inside the country. So I'm not part of the public sector, I'm not an ambassador, but what I would say is you should come and visit the country, because those that usually do, they're always thinking about when they can next return, and more often they're thinking when they can come and live there. So it's a big, wide sort of red carpet that I'm rolling out on behalf of sort of, I guess, the rest of us. So.
Can I ask a quick question about that? When you
Sure.
guys talk about UAE, are you just talking about Abu Dhabi, or do you also mean Dubai or other parts of the region?
So it's certainly, so a step back, definitely when we say UAE, that's the federal, right? That's inclusive of each of the Emirates, which the analogous side is that they're states. It's true, and one of the questions we'll cover later is the difference between the Emirates and somewhat a different approach. But federal is what leads a lot of the regulation when it comes to immigration, policies, and others. We all 3 represent Abu Dhabi to some extent, although I'm a federalist. My wife is from Dubai, so I easily pull that card. But the truth is that it's a very coordinated economy. Right? So there's nothing that we would say is to the detriment of one to the other. We just happen to represent, I think, a large part of that Abu Dhabi side today.
Yeah, cool. Maybe you can add some more color to that from the perspective of the incubation program at ADQ. What kinds of companies you are incubating, what you're looking for, and what your main focus is on.
Yep, sounds good. So. We see companies more and more looking at venture building as a key activity to transform, because obviously with in investments you can go so far, but when you have the ability to build companies, you're able to kind of leapfrog, go from 1 to 10 as opposed to 1 to 2 or 3. This is something that we've realized internally, and we've thought about how best to structure this department. And we came to the realization that for us to have impact, we need to make sure that we attract the right founders and builders to come and join us. So this is why we are in the process of launching our venture studio that will be able to work with founders at a very early stage to onboard them, and we would co-build with them by giving them access to our portfolio, with regards to support on regulations, to help to de-risk the first few phases of venture building. And for us, this is important because we think this fills a gap in the market. Often you find global companies wanting to come to the UAE, but they struggle a bit when it comes to how to adapt to the local market. Then you also have your startups that need support in scaling. And we hope to be that bridge for the local companies and the global ones coming to the UAE to look at how can we reduce the execution friction and to make sure that the teams are incentivized and to increase the chances of success. So we got very excited by the work that DJH is doing in the region because we're able to get access to talent, to ideas, and we are very excited by the prospects of building ventures together.
James, so for me, one of the things that was a little confusing in the beginning when I moved to the UAE, and especially when I started to go to Abu Dhabi, was just the sheer amount of acronyms. You know, ADGM, ADCP, ADQ, ADG. So it's kind of like it's difficult to figure out what's what and how do they work together. And I think one of the most important things that you can speak to, in my opinion, is maybe ADGM, and explain the free zone to the audience and how it works and what your role is within ADGM and your long-term kind of goals and the companies you're looking for.
Sure, and I'll try and address some of the questions about the different Emirates as well within that. But to Nabyl's point about what the UAE's priority is and diversifying the economy away from hydrocarbons, there's a very clear 30-year strategy about different industries and what those industries need to deliver to get to that place. And we sit within the financial services one. So there was a very clear strategy about how financial services can be a core part of the economy for the UAE and for Abu Dhabi. Within Abu Dhabi, you have onshore and offshore, and the ADGM Abu Dhabi global market is a financial free zone, and essentially be viewed as a Canary Wharf or a Manhattan. It's the financial center of Abu Dhabi. We work with the DIFC, so a lot of people come to Abu Dhabi and say the Dubai investment financial center is there. Why have you got another big financial center just down the road? And we want the DIFC to do well. The DIFC is doing a great job at the moment of attracting a lot of digital assets and crypto and fund managers, and we work closely with them, and we want them to do well. Post Abraj, I don't know how many people are familiar with Abraj and a private equity fund that blew up, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago now. There's a lot of thought that's gone into making the ADGM stand out as an institutional home for fund managers and for financial corporates. There's a lot of people in digital assets who are focused on democratization and for getting payments at a lower price point. That was a lot of the Abraj story as well, going into emerging markets, getting better outcomes for lots of people. And we've got to be very careful about the businesses that we want to attract. And the good thing about ADGM is you are working with a very patient backer who want to have the right businesses and want to have the right people operating in that ecosystem and to do it for the long term. And we play one small part of that. So we run a fund called the ADGM Catalyst Fund, and we look to invest in predominantly fund managers, but also corporates who can put a long-term presence in the ADGM. And we focus on fund managers with a belief that, as Nabyl mentioned, they can be a foundation for attracting advisors, lawyers, accountancy firms, the banks that will ultimately come in, but the fund managers will be the foundations and the bedrock of that ecosystem. And then we try and invest in some corporates such as Securrency, who are here today, Halo, a structured notes issuance platform, Telegram, which we announced we've invested in, who we believe will be enablers for growth in that asset management industry. So how do we structure, distribute, tokenize the funds and the products that we're investing in and really get that ecosystem firing up? To date, we've deployed around about $1 billion into 20 portfolio companies. And the plan is to keep building on that and keep attracting these types of businesses. Digital assets is key, and I was over the moon with a real interest in digital for the last 8-9 years when we realized the regulatory framework that had been put in place in the ADGM. They really were at the forefront. They'd hired really thoughtful regulators from English common law jurisdictions such as Singapore and from Canada, Australia. And the regulatory environment is tight, but it's very, very forward-thinking. And they want to engage with the market. They want to engage with funds and with corporates. And they really want to be seen as the institutional home for digital assets. So for us, that's a focus. For us, it's been how do we bring the fund managers, the corporates, the market makers, the liquidity providers, who are going to be growing this ecosystem over the next 10, 15 years. And that's the last bit of it, is the capital's patient. There's no rush. There's a long-term vision of how we grow the ecosystem. And it has to be very thoughtful about how we deploy that capital.
It's interesting. You see, from an outsider's perspective, when I first came to the Emirates, it was all Dubai, 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 right? I mean, I think they're more on the forefront. They are, you know, very, they're not risk averse, not very risk averse anyway. And it seems to me like it almost attracts like two sorts of companies or startups or gravitate more towards Dubai at the moment. You see a lot more, you know, token projects there, some good, some not so good. And then it feels like, you know, what trickles down to Abu Dhabi is then the quality and, you know, where the business gets serious. And is that something that works like together? Is that complementary? Is that, how do you see that situation, Nabyl?
Look, I'm going to, my old professor, Barry Nailbuff, he coined this term called co-opetition, right? And I think that's probably the most important way to sort of articulate the relationship between two different Emirates like Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And keep in mind that there are more Emirates, but this for our conversation, let's focus on those two. I think from a leadership perspective, the value proposition between the two are certainly complementary, right? Dubai is known for specific aspects of its economy, its hospitality, in many cases its infrastructure. Abu Dhabi obviously has other aspects, its energy, its portfolio with its financial services. But together, it provides a unique value proposition. They're an hour by car, right? So I mean, those who haven't visited, it sounds like we're talking, you're gonna get on a plane. No, you can literally do a commute like you're getting on the Metro North and you're in the next one. And by the way, I think we're doing Railway, one of the ADQ projects, you're connecting us. So there you go. So you can get on a train and go between the two. When I say competition, it's truly that they are willing to compete in specific sectors to attract, but I also think that that's a little bit around those that find something of interest to them in each of the markets, right, or each in the Emirates. Because the developer community is more saturated in Dubai, so if you want to do DeFi, you're certainly going to find that. I think it's a lifestyle point, right? It's it skews to a specific type of attractor. In places like Abu Dhabi, due to the proximity to some of the very large industry, and in particular, for direct investment, if you're looking at that, most of the large entities, the BlackRocks, the Apollos, they're really based in Abu Dhabi. So when we believe, and you know, Tim was talking about this last night at dinner, he was talking about it on stage, as financial institutions, certainly in the mature markets, begin looking at the space, our view and conviction is Abu Dhabi would be a natural counterpart for that type of dialogue, right? Because there's already pre-existing relationships from our sovereign wealth funds like Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Mubadala, who, as James mentioned, is the LP behind some of their initiatives. They're going to bring in those backers into the system. Maybe just to talk a little bit about Securrency, I know that's one of James' portfolio companies. You know, they have backing from guys like State Street, Wisdom Tree. They're based in Abu Dhabi. That's a good value proposition for them. At the same time, I think there are fantastic entities that are going to set up in Dubai that have nothing to do with sort of that core industry of Abu Dhabi. But the fact you can get them both in a single environment with the regulation in such a way that you can operate relatively unconstrained, I think that's somewhat unique, right? And importantly, it's the access point that the UAE gives you to the broader region. And we'll talk about that a bit later. But this is the way that most people go into places like Africa. This is the way that people access South Asia. That's where there's a very interesting value proposition to the UAE.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that the audience has a chance to ask any questions if you want to, because these guys they're not often seen on the stage, let alone together. Otherwise, I'll just continue with my questions. But does anyone have a question from the audience? Nope. All right. Cool. There you go.
So, let's see. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So if we are operating a decentralized finance company with a wide range of products and services, and we're getting a little bit disappointed in some of the regulatory decisions that are being taken by some of the regulators in places that have traditionally been a little bit more crypto-friendly, would you suggest that the UAE, particularly Abu Dhabi or Dubai, would be a good place to think about shifting operations towards, with the idea that, at least for my company, we want to be totally above board, licensed, regulated in all appropriate manners, but we'd also like to do that in a geography where people are friendly to crypto, as opposed to listening some of your the earlier panel's comments about how the US, for example, is perhaps heading in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, I can go first and jump in, guys, but absolutely should be the short answer. I mean, we were lucky that we sit on the board of a couple of digital blockchain companies with pretty big institutions who systematically rank jurisdictions by favorability of regulator. And the ADGM specifically, who was the first regulator to put in place a digital framework, sits like number 3 or 4 consistently. And I think the US, I don't want to get shot, is like 82nd or something. So, which again, most people here would get that. So the regulator is very interested in who's doing what, wants to cooperate, wants to understand, and wants to put in place a fit-for-purpose regulatory environment. So absolutely, and you'll get, if you're coming and you're willing to spend time there, you'll get access to the regulator, to the people within the regulator, including the chairman who loves this type of asset class, and to investors who are putting real capital to work right now in this area.
I think we have one more there.
Hi, thank you very much. Nabyl, you asked who had visited UAE. I visited 18 times in the last 4 years. So, and we're setting up shop there. We are Invenium, and with Zanbank and LL Holdings, right? So, but would like to connect up with you when I meet there. The question I have is, what's the difference, DFC and ADGM, right? Understood both those things, but from a regulatory perspective as it relates to DAOs, tokenized securities, I didn't say security token, tokenized securities on the digital asset side, and facilitating digital trading of assets. Even the Invenium Carbon, I think they have created carbon credits exchange right now. I just formulated, right? It's not yet mobile. So which regulatory environment is better, DIFC or ADGM? Or they're both equally transparent and both are actually, will be compliant in both those markets?
Yeah, again, so both have excellent regulatory environments for both carbon trading. We have a carbon trading investment as well, and a carbon trading platform, and for digital assets. The DIFC has recently brought out some updated rules around custody of digital assets and market making for digital assets. The regulations are, it's like comparing the SEC and the FCA, I suppose. There's a lot of commonality. There are some slight differences. ADGM has applied English common law in its entirety. So for all intents and purposes, when you are operating an entity, whether it's a bank or a fund manager, it's like operating out of London. The DIFC has put most of English common law, but again, there's some differences. But again, both of the regulators are at the forefront of trying to regulate and be friendly to digital asset businesses. But really, you'd have to go and speak to your advisors, and lawyers would be the right answer and work out the best one for you.
I think it's funny because the disclaimer at the front of the conference is very important here. Let me add even more complexity to it. I think you need to really understand that we operated historically through things that were free zones, right? And each free zone was based upon the activity undertaken within that economic, specifically designated area. So we have things like an internet city in Dubai. We have things that are, specifically for the telcos. It depends very much, and you'll get this context if you have a basis in the United States. It depends whether you're going to look at this as a commodity, whether it's a security, whether it's a utility. So depending on the project you're doing and the backing of that token, there are different jurisdictions that would take provenance over your activities. So in Dubai, for example, you have things that are around the commodities, and they have a framework to engage with players specifically for those type of tokens. In the same way, a lot of the new regulation which is happening is even outside of DIFC because they want to potentially avoid some of the issues that would be associated with specifically ascribing to a security token, right? So things that are around the Dubai World Trade Center, DWTC, which is the regulation for VADA, that's where the guys like Binance and others are setting up. It's because they're not necessarily trading in security tokens. They might be looking more to typically at tokenomics with coins and others, right? But we're not, we're providing you a very high level cross section. I think the point is, when you listen to the level of specificity that we can provide you with that kind of aspect of both Abu Dhabi and Dubai, it's because the government, the leadership, have a strong conviction, right? James was talking about the chairman for the ADGM, fully bullish on this, very versed in it. Faisal with the venture studio that they're going to be creating. A through line of that strategy is how do they harness things like blockchain and digital assets to be a disruptor to the traditional businesses that we run in the place. So that's where, as I say, we've been doing this as a family for many decades. This is clearly a keystone moment to, again, pivot and to redefine itself. And that's what the UAE does well, right? And I think that the fact that you have an Abu Dhabi panel sitting in New York, that's probably reflective of how serious we're taking it, right?
Oh yeah, totally. James, what are the, so because there seems to be so many different free zones and regulations, and from your perspective and from a perspective of deploying capital, what are the requirements? Like what does a company have to be, or where do I have to set up shop to be able to get funding, not just through you, but also through some of the other funds that are Mubadala backed?
Yeah, look, we're very ADGM focused, but equally we're also very UAE friendly. So if a business doesn't want to be or doesn't feel like it should be in the ADGM, we will introduce them to the right partners, potential partners, regulators across the jurisdiction. But for us, we look for businesses who will put real boots on the ground, put a sustainable presence, open an office, hopefully be regulated, and has a pathway for growing there. And then ultimately, in our, the clues in the title of our name, be a catalyst for other investors to come in. And other investors is normally the big brothers of Mubadala, ADQ, ADIA, Abu Dhabi Pension Fund, or the other pockets of capital that can really move businesses forward. And we're very fortunate to date, out of those 20 investments, 6 or 7 of those that are very early stage, we've been the first investor, we've put their board, we've brought the senior people there, we've helped them relocate their families, we've made sure their children go to the right schools, we've helped them integrate into Abu Dhabi. Their businesses have gone well, we've helped them with the regulatory applications. Their business is in the right area. Carbon's a good example, salmon farming's a good example, Securrency's a good example, Halo's another great example, where we've bought in Abu Dhabi Inc. for sizable follow-on investments, and then those businesses are really taking off and scaling in the right way. So it's our job to find those businesses that are there for the right reasons, that strategy-wise aligns with the priorities of the UAE perhaps, be the catalyst for getting them there and for getting them off the ground, and then finding the backer that will take them onto their next stage of growth.
Before we wrap it up, any final questions from the audience? No, cool. So what I want to do is also for the audience that joins us through the live stream and who can't tackle you guys when you get off stage, how can you guys be reached? How can people reach out for more information and learn more about the different organizations you work with?
If I go first, come to Abu Dhabi and see us. I've purposely hardly bought any business cards. We're going to run away right after this stage. But no, we're very accessible. You'll find our details. Happy to share those details. It's a wonderfully accessible place. Every time people are willing to spend time and ask about Abu Dhabi, we're willing to tell them what the story is and how we can potentially help them. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add from my side, we're keen to work with startups, companies, and even founders who are willing to come to the UAE to build these ventures. And you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to respond to you and engage. So looking forward to getting these requests. Thank you.
It's also useful that the parent company actually owns the airline as well, so it's sort of convenient. No, look, I think the reality is for family offices, typically most inbounds to us are by referral, right? So if you're a U.S. company, you can reach out to Commerce, the attaché at the embassy knows how to get in touch with us. We meet most of the U.S. delegations that come through. Obviously, we work very closely. So ADQ with Faisal, we have working relationships. If it's a portfolio company that touches us, we engage. James and the guys in Catalyst are collaborators as well. I think, as a family office, we kind of balance a little bit whether it's inbound or it's outbound, right? So sometimes when we work very closely with government, we help identify the areas that are of interest, and in those cases, we'll pursue those relationships proactively, right? Because we're looking to bring either expertise or we're looking to find a specific set of solutions that we think help create the value proposition that we want. In that case, I think in the conference, certainly I have colleagues here, we're scanning constantly the environment, but because it's such a fast-moving space, it's just sort of very network driven, right? And honestly, the fact that our relationship with DGH, that's been our outlet to the world. And the fact that Josef is based in Dubai creates that sort of, for us, connectivity into the blockchain space, right? So certainly work with the fund managers. They have access to us, and that's how we get a lot of the information, because we rely on their judgment and expertise, right? And so certainly it's a way also to thank Josef and DGH team for putting the event together. It's great to be here, and bug Josef, don't bug me.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm happy to facilitate an intro as well. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.